It's story time with Jarrod Dahl. Where are we? Here. Hey everybody. Are there people filing in, Jasmine, or?
It says 4 at the moment.
Okay. Yeah, I didn't announce it today, so we'll see. Maybe people got other things going on because it's so nice. Well, it may not be nice everywhere. It's nice here. Yeah, I don't know why they have these such a glossy photo. There we go. More people?
8.
8. I'm just looking for a couple photos. That's one, but I thought there was another. Yeah, I think there's another one there, but I'm gonna do a little bit of talk intro and turn an end grain handled vessel on my pole lathe. And so what I'm gonna turn is one of these. These are old Irish drinking vessels called Lámhóg. It's spelled a little funny, but it's pronounced Lámhóg according to my Irish friends who schooled me on the way to pronounce it. And I think it means something like a little handle or little ear, little handle. And so I got fascinated with these after turning on the pole lathe for, 3-4 years, turning lots of bowls, lots of sneap skull, the handled vessels made from side grain wood, and slowly got into turning end grain, mainly thinking that cups are more marketable. People understand that you can drink out of a wooden cup, whereas I had found that it's a very smaller market, or people who are interested in using wooden bowls at their table, at least here in the West. So developing end grain turning skills, techniques, and tools was something I was fascinated with early on. And I think when I first started turning on the pole lathe, I made this sort of ramshackle, bolted together lathe just to see if I'd like it, knowing that it may not be for me. And I remember trying to turn end grain even back then, and after a few cuts and trying to plunge the tool directly into the end grain, I gave up. I pushed too hard, I kinked the mandrel connection. It's way over my skill set at the time. So I abandoned it, and then years later became more proficient at turning and understanding how to make hook tools and how they work, and then developed end grain turning techniques, and have gone on to travel and share that stuff with folks as much as I can. So early on, I got Robin Wood's book, and not really a how-to book, but it's really one of the best books on a history of wooden bowls and woodenware, and focuses on England, a little bit more on the British Isles, and then and then a little bit less on European history because it's all tied together. But in there's this picture of this Irish Lámhóg And I think there's another picture in this book somewhere. I just couldn't find it. I was really fascinated and really enjoyed that shape and the idea of end grain handled cups. And later on, purchasing this book by Jonathan Levy, I think it's pretty available, and in there they highlight a few of the Lámhóg here and here. This is a more obscure drinking vessel called a meather. But really digging these and finding some online too. So developing techniques to turn end grain, tools and whatnot. I started not with handled but small globular cups inspired by the cups they found in the Oseberg Viking ship burial excavations and things like that. And I was turning lots of end grain with the pith in and figuring out how to dry that and then slowly moved into deeper and deeper vessels. Here's another book. I just got a copy of this one. The last few years, this one's been pretty valuable in the used market, and it's out of print, I believe. And there's a small section on small woodenwares and things like that. So you have pictures of Lámhóg and a coopered drinking vessel, and shelves and furniture supporting these end-grain vessels, more meathers. And then I think it was 2017 I got a chance to go teach in England, and also went to the Birmingham Museum where the Pinto collection resides, which is I think one of the largest collections of woodenware in the world, and most of it's put in storage. And I made an appointment and got some of these Lámhóg pulled out for me, but then when we arrived, they were understaffed and they couldn't allow me to handle and measure and stuff the cup, so it was in a glass case. I was really bummed, but I got to take some pictures of it, and here's some photos that I got from Robin of the Lámhóg and the Pinto collection that he studied when he was writing his book. And just fascinated with this particular cup here, these really graceful, sexy curves. There's little concave areas and swollen areas, and through my experience turning and trying to turn these forms, realizing how this shape is influenced by the techniques, the process of how you rough out and rough turn the material, it would almost naturally leave a little bit more material in this area here. So I theorize that's why there's a slight bulge there, and then they make it into a fair curve. So the past maybe 6 years, I've been turning and offering these up for sale once a year, sometimes twice a year. And I do 20, 25, maybe 30. And so I've made a few hundred of them. And my process is always one of slight exploration, even though I have a general design concept in mind. So, I'm aiming for cups like this. And through the process of making it, they end up a little different. But I'm still trying to make the same or similar cup so I can market it as here's one cup photo, here's the Lámhóg, it's this many ounces, and there might be 20 of them that are very close to the same, without being strict on myself about it, allowing that handmade element to come into play like potters. So over the years, I've explored different designs, and some of you may have these, but they change from year to year, batch to batch, depending on how I'm perceiving things. but really trying, I think my peak Lathe design is this cup in particular. And so by making 20 at a time, but slightly different, allowing that natural deviation to happen in very slight nuanced ways, I can't stress that enough. When I'm done, I'm able to compare all of them and say, all right, that one's got something really sweet. That one is not so good. You know, overall, they're all good, in my opinion, but some are very good, exceptional, and some are moderate to barely making the mark. And so I'm able to like pick out the best one that I feel is the best, look at it, study and compare what I like about it, and then go on, you know, put it in my brain and then go on to trying to duplicate it again. And that's how I approach spoon carving, that's how I approach bowl turning. All of my work, I do it in batches of 2 to 20, and then I compare and find the best, what I like the sweetest, and compare them. And I'm a really big advocate for that style of working, if you can pull it off. I know not everybody can. So when I'm teaching spoon carving in particular, I always encourage people to, if you can, just carve 2 spoons back to back instead of just one. And you're going to improve because there's this comparison that's happening at the same time. So here's some examples of different Lámhóg. If anybody is listening and has any questions, just shout out. Jasmine will field the questions. And so you can see the differences in these cups, and they're not in any chronological order. This is an earlier one, but this one was made at about the same time. And if we were to compare these two, you know, I would venture to say most of us would agree that this one is a better design, more graceful, flowing curves. This one is a little bit dull in this area here. Doesn't mean that this is a bad cup by any means, but if we were, as a maker and designer, which one am I going to want to study, and which one is people going to really gravitate to? You know, this one has those elements of curve, but not quite proportionately. It's not quite as nice. You know, this one's pretty sweet, although different in lots of areas, especially up here. There's less flare. It goes almost straight up, but you still have this small foot and this concave and flowing curve with a slight concave here. But what I'm looking at these days is this angle. Is it flared or is it almost straight up and down? If you're looking at this photo, you can see it's flared all the way out from base to rim. And this really has something that none of these cups on the table have. So that's what I'm going for. This again, it's a little bit vertical here. This is my last batch, which has this type of straight up and down area instead of a flare. So anyway, that's what I'm going to be working on. And yeah, if you have any questions, just holler, and we'll just go into the lathe room and go from there.
Miranda wants to know if you're going to talk about the hooks that
We'll
you
talk
used.
about the hooks, Miranda. So, walk it slow. Maybe you want to come in here so people can see more.
You might hit me with a chip.
I won't. I got extra safety glasses around here. So if you can understand this as a piece of birch, I got this nice log outside. I cut it. I split it in half. I want to remove the pith from the cup. It's not necessary if you can dry it in a controlled way, but it's more predictable if you get the pith out. So I have a proportion kind of set already, and I drew this circle marking the center point, marking the handle as well. I got a pencil here. What's important when you're turning handled vessels is to make sure that your grain is kind of in the long ways in the handle. And that has to do with where you orient the handle on the cup. If I were to make it, that was not a good thing, but best would be to have that handle perfectly parallel, but the worst would be to have the handle this way, where the grain is crossing, so it'd be more fragile and more likely to break off if you were to drop it, or even in the turning process.
Someone asked, do you know the measurements?
No. It's like 4 inches and whatever that might be. I'll decide when I turn what this length is going to be. So it'll be like 7 or 8 inches to start with, and 4-inch diameter. I'm going to put a little bit of taper into this, but not too much, because once I get it mounted on the lathe, I may have taken too much off one side, and then I'm going to limit myself on what's possible to turn. So keeping it more cylindrical than tapered, just slightly tapered. I'll explain that after. So this is new wood. I haven't turned it yet. It's a little stringy, which will make it good for cups and bowls. Strong. And that's the handle that I just axed. So I'm axing around the perimeter, trying to go cylinder or slightly tapered. And if you use this part of your axe, you're going to have a lot of control than this part up here. And especially if you drop your handle down a little bit, you can kind of get that cutting first, and then as you get a shaving going, then you can always tilt up and then apply more force. So I'm almost cutting sideways. So now I'm going to chop in and cut the handle area. Be careful not to hit too hard. It kind of goes in and it kind of stops in a solid way. That's as far as you want to go for depth. And then flip it up on edge, and then come down. So you can see how I proceed. Both sides. If you keep it more cylindrical, then it's easier to see how to approach this area down here. I tapered it a little bit, but it becomes more of a challenge to kind of see how the handle is developing as you carve it out. And notice I'm choked way up on my axe now too for control. And I have a lighter grip. My fingers are extended. So one side. This is going to be a pretty big Lámhóg. I tried to make the rim a little bit bigger than normal because of that shape I was talking, the flare and the straight. And so I'm trying to get back to that flared shape. After the last batch I did this spring, I think. I wanted to make some changes. And this technique, of course, you could use for any handled vessel. And for those of you anxious who are just getting started on pole turning, unfortunately, I advocate for being able to turn like 50 bowls without catching your tool once. Understanding cutting, the basic cutting, like almost mastering it for the most part. Keeping your tools sharp, all of those things are directly related to advancing to end grain turning. Because I'm plunging the tool into end grain, you need ultimate tool control. If you push too hard, you're going to catch. You need to add extra force when you're pumping, and those combinations, if done improperly, will kink the mandrel connection. Once that's loose, you'll never be able to turn, and it will be moving like this as it's spinning, and you'll have to abandon. And it's quite deep. So I haven't seen anybody, who's turned 10 bowls, 20 bowls even, be able to plunge in without catching and kinking the connection. Maybe someone's out there who's done it, but maybe under the watchful eye of an instructor. But you'll save yourself a lot of frustration if you just wait and get the skills, and then make the tools, and know what you need to make for the tools before you get going.
Question about what you recommend. What would you recommend for end grain?
Medium density, diffuse porous trees. So birch. Out west would be big leaf maple, Pacific Northwest. England's sycamore, which is a maple tree. Birch, you can get birch over there too. East Coast, you can get birch. So birch is a good one. Maybe cherry, but cherry's going to be harder. Too soft, and you run into some issues too with tearing at the bottom. Beech works okay, but it should be mellowed. So I have to make sure that this is, I'm visualizing an axis line through this and how it's going to spin, and if this is even or not. I need to accommodate that because the ultimate height of the finished cup is limited by where the lowest point is, and then I'm going to go down a little bit more. then go there from my handle to get the handle proportion just right. So something like that. My cup might only be this tall. I need a saw, I'll be right back. So now, splitting this, you have to be careful that the grain doesn't wander in and just split the whole handle off. So it's splitting fairly straight, but I'm going to come at it from above. And chop. The top is easier because it's shorter. This longer one to be more concerned about. So, and then you want to protect this. You don't want to set it on your block and smash it off. So. So I'm not going to worry about this too much. I'm just going to get it close because I can turn it. Being very careful. You know, and now would be easier to taper, but again, once I put that mandrel, and if I put the mandrel in crooked, then I'm going to need to mount the other part over here, and then I'm going to be limited by that irregularity. So if you don't taper it, you can always judge whether it's parallel to the floor, which allows for a better. And so I have mandrels. This is a tenon mandrel, and the other type of mandrel we use is a spike mandrel. Spike mandrels tend to not hold very good in end grain, and again they will loosen over time, and then as you turn, they'll be spinning, you know, bending back and forth as it's spinning, and it won't be able to turn a true object. So a tenon mandrel is what's best. It's maybe 7/8 of a diameter hole. Turn this so it's tapered and slightly flared. You shouldn't be able to move it or twist it. Okay? This is a newer mandrel. And I want to sit on that stove.
I think I'm
Careful,
gonna.
there's pokey bits over there.
Okay.
So, just like the last time, when we're turning on the pole lathe, we want to make sure that the mandrel is spinning true and it's not bouncing down. If it's bouncing down on a downward push, and if the drive strap is in this location over here, closest to the connection, it can force the kink to even go more. So I always lower it to the very bottom of its arc and then raise up. One of the biggest mistakes beginners make is trying to turn with this bunting up and down. And then the connection moves a little bit or starts to wobble a lot, and then you just can't turn. Doesn't matter which way I'm going to go here, so I'm going to turn the foot first. So it's pretty good. It's not shaking too much. So maybe we can zoom in on the tool, Jasmine. This is a hook that doesn't have much taper before it's scrolled, and I'm slowly moving over to this design for almost all my hooks, because we're using hooks. We can turn and twist the tool in all kinds of ways that are quite easy to adjust for any taper or lack of taper. I'm going to get my safety glasses on here. Even on the pole lathe, you should wear safety glasses. I've gotten wood chips taken out of my eyes at the eye doctor.
That was dramatic.
It happens. It happens, especially with a new mandrel. So the main thing is to make sure the connection is good, and it still is. So.
Good thing I wasn't doing a close-up.
Yeah. I noticed the last time I turned, there's something funny with one of my poppets. The moisture level in my shop is changing. It's swinging from 40% to 65% these last few weeks, back and forth. And I try to maintain the humidity in there to 60, 65, just so drying is easy. But things are moving and swelling, and yeah. So something's not quite, but you can see it. I bumped it. So. So now I have to decide, do I straighten it or readjust? And my connection is still really strong. It's not moving. So I'm gonna go with this. If you've turned a mandrel, it's the same process. Same hook technique. maybe, do you want to try coming back here and
Okay.
seeing? We're going to see if we can get a better...
There's a couple
angle.
questions about, would you ever recommend using a gouge, and what difference does less taper on the tool make?
Less taper makes it a little bit easier to use because there's less variables. And it works good for finish cuts on bowls. And again, this is like hot rodding your tools. It's not needed, but it does, having taper doesn't do that much as far as I can tell. A gouge could work, but you need to have a parallel tool rest for a gouge. And you can't really effectively cut with a gouge with this tool rest because it's too far. The support is too far, and you're going to have to go this direction. So if you had a spindle lathe, you're turning end grain, you could do it. Try back here, Jasmine. And I don't know if you can see.
Yeah.
So if I, on end grain, and this doesn't work for tangential wood, but on end grain, this parallel untapered hook, it also makes it easier to understand how this works. This is going to be a complete catch. The cutting edge is completely parallel to the fibers or to the axis. And that's just going to grab. And this, unlike electric lathes, this doesn't have any power to back up the cut. There's no momentum, and so we're going to feel that in our leg, and it's just going to stop. So the best way to do it, just like even with roughing gouges on electric lathes, is to skew that cutting edge slightly and come across from high to low. And so we do that by turning the hook. So if we turn the hook completely vertical, the edge being vertical, I can't cut at all. So we're going to turn that back a little bit. It's like maybe 45 degrees from a catch, or halfway between vertical and horizontal, somewhere like this, with this particular hook. If you have a tapered hook, you would need less twist to get the same skewing action. And then with pole lathe turning, there's always a pivot. We were never sliding the tools along because we can't. We're standing on one leg and pumping. And so we don't have the availability of being shifting our weight and things like that. So that's why hooks are the best for turning bowls and things like that. Again, gouges and spindle work, chair legs and stuff is a little bit different. They tend to be longer and smaller diameter. Anyway, so we're going to set up a pivot and then pivot the cut in and out of the wood. Does that come in? Can you see?
I think so, yeah. I think so.
Yeah, it looks like it. So I need to repivot. I ran out, so I'm going to move my pivot point over a little bit. And then start again. I'm moving my hand away so that you can see. Normally I would be locked around. If it starts to catch, I'm going to turn it down or turn it away, which will be more skew and less grab. For that handle. So I just chopped in on some aggressive, deep pivot cuts to rough it out, and now I can make more smoothing, shallower pivots. And then I'm going to get this area here. I'm going to use a smaller hook. And this way I'm pivoting from down low up. Switching back to the other hook. Okay, I'm gonna flip it around. So you can pull it down and...
People like the angle. Thanks,
Yeah.
because it's it's really hard to hold it like this.
I'm gonna turn it around, so maybe you can shoot over here for a little while.
All right. Do the hooks always bend to the right, or do you have some to the left?
For this type of turning, they always bend to the right. It depends on which side is sharpened, but yeah, you're not limited to that per se. And for different types of turning, you'd have different hooks too. I have some other hooks that aren't. They do to the left. We'll give Jasmine a break for a few minutes. But if you watch here, you can see where I'm cutting. And the other thing too is, well, from that position, just watch how I'm pivoting and watch how I'm twisting the tool. And you'll learn a lot. And so now I'm working the handle area with the smaller hook. And then that's a pivot up. This hook has been used so much, it has a lot of taper to it. And sometimes I wonder if we look back at the historical hooks that we do have, the taper might have been from sharpening. It might not have been the preferred hook. It just might be what they ended up being, and then we look at them 100 years later. And so, you know, that's kind of where I'm going with this untapered hook.
Someone asked, do you sharpen only the inside of the hook?
Inside and outside.
And Adrian wants to know if you've ever made hooks from flat bar to make it easier, although handling is harder slightly.
Square, I would use square, if that's what you meant, Aid. Because you could still taper and hammer that square rod into a round hole if you had a ferrule. I haven't, I just buy the round stuff. But the Japanese hook I brought back from Japan is square. It's mild steel, and then there's a weld in high carbon, probably high speed, welded to it, and it's a square shaft. Use what you got. Now, because this is a larger diameter and the grain is like so, we're going to need to carve in this direction from high to low, or if we think of those fibers as like hairs, we're petting the cat from the head to the tail. So I need to cut this direction now. So I'll flip my tool over and then pivot in the opposite direction, but still skewing. And that untapered hook, again, I don't have to turn it as much because the taper isn't there. I'll do some finish cuts and then you can, unless you can see. I just want to rough it up. This tool is a little dull in the spot that I need it to be sharp, so I'm going to sharpen it in a bit. Now I'm going to kind of part off the rim area. And I'm going to judge now my handle and the proportions. Rarely do I turn with a template. And in the past I would just try to use my memory as much as possible, but I've been referencing that a little bit once in a while. I won't obsess about it, but just trying to understand, what I did. So I'm just going from down below up with a pivot. Something to think about, there's always two parts to the cut. There's always a ledge that we're carving on. And in this case, the ledge is the top of the cup and then the wood that's remaining. And so I'm having to find a skew and a shear and where the tool can do both, smooth and then shearing this bump down. You can only favor one or the other, but you can't favor both. That's generally the twist with turning hooks or gouges.
It smells good.
Yeah, it's really nice wood, fast grain. It's got this almost translucent spring ring, this dark ring. You guys won't be able to see it on the camera, but it's thick and it's see-through. The really fast growth birch is like fast growth deciduous. Deciduous trees are always the best. Strong, flexible, and then conifers, it's the opposite. And it's surprising how many people don't understand that.
You're at 50 minutes, by the way.
50 minutes already. It's pretty much unrefuted. We're going to have to go to another session. So I got the rough flare, and then I'm going to find my axe, and then I'm going to take some of this down. Because is I'm going to start turning that center area. And it is a lot easier if it's uniform. Being careful not to cut up here. And I've intentionally left this area thicker or bigger diameter, so if I cut into this, it's okay. I used to establish the foot, and then sometimes my axe would come down and cut off the foot. So.
My finger went in front of the camera for a second.
Shoring up the handle a little bit more. I'll leave the handle thick for now, but then near the end, I'll make it thinner and I'll turn up to it.
On production runs of these, does the bandsaw come into play for any of the roughing?
The bandsaw does not. They're too tall for my bandsaw. And again, the problem is that without the mandrel in place, I don't know where this point is. And so and it's really hard to drill this in line with that invisible axis. And so if I shape this too much ahead of time, I'll lose the possibility of making the shapes I want because the axis is too skewed. I haven't really found a great way of doing it. I'm exploring mounting the mandrel on the blank and then chucking this up between centers on my electric lathe even, and then turning these down rough, then turning the whole thing down on the pole lathe. Taking the mandrel off and then hollowing with the electric is what I normally do now. Today I'll just hollow with the pole lathe tools, but I'm not strict when it comes to the electric lathes versus the non-electric lathes. There's a little bit of a thing here. I have to take this rim down a little bit more. So I didn't notice that at first. That's going to interfere with my shape and proportions. Turning this down, so then I have to turn all of that down to follow. That hook is a little new, and so it's a bit aggressive. Okay, now I'm going to turn this area. And it's about controlled pedaling. So I have to be light. And it works best to start the handle here. You want to control your pedal in a comfortable position. So too low when it's too hard, too high, somewhere in the middle.
Do you want me to stand behind you?
And you can hear I'm banging a little bit on the handle, that's okay. Maybe so now. So you can see that I can't get my hook engaged right at the return section of the area. So as I push down, it cuts deeper to full depth, and then as I come back, I just can't get it engaged. It's just kind of an impossibility. So right now I'm turning something that's kind of oval, and you can see this ledge here reveals it where there is no ledge here. So I'm going to turn this down, then I'm going to flip the cup over, and then I'm going to turn the opposite from here over, and then turn that ledge off. And so you go back and forth, turning it oval, turning it true, turning it oval, turning it true, until you get the shape and the finish that you're going for.
We're at 57.
You better shut it down.
Yeah.
We'll be back.
So, yeah, tune back in for the next half of this. See you in a minute.